If you follow the bureaucracy and acquiescing because it might not fit the institutionalist model that raised you up, you will fail. But if you follow your convictions and you fight with everything you got, I think you win. That's the only way to defeat fascism.
What if the West Coast didn't have to wait for Washington, D.C. to get its act together? What if we stopped asking permission and instead used the tools already in our constitutional toolkit and in our state laws to defend democracy, dignity, and the people who live here? This is a very special episode of Pacific Time. I'm talking with Christopher Armitage, the strongest voice on soft secession I've come across. I'd say we're well aligned, but increasingly, I think I'm taking my cues from Chris. My friend Cheryl knew what she was doing when she steered me to his like-minded Substack. Chris is the creator of the Existentialist Republic, one of the fastest growing political Substacks in America. He's a former member of the U.S. Air Force, a law enforcement officer who is experienced in national and homeland security. He's also a high-integrity voice calling for moral federalism and strategic state-level power based on his very thorough research, great writing, and precise calls for action. Chris argues that soft secession, not full-blown secession, but selective, principled, state-level non-compliance is not only legal, not only moral, but maybe the only practical way to preserve democratic self-government in an era of federal hostility and institutional breakdown. As he puts it, states need to strategically refuse to participate in corruption, retreat, or cruelty. This is an episode about courage, not abstract courage, but specific, actionable steps that governors, mayors, attorneys general, and yes, we as ordinary citizens can take right now. It's about rebuilding moral authority where the federal government has abandoned it. And it's about what the West Coast could become if we reclaimed the agency and imagination with the conviction our moment demands. Welcome to Pacific Time. I'm Greg Ammerfell, your host and your neighbor on the West Coast. I refuse to condone the demolition of democracy, and I'm so excited to have Chris Armitage here to help us articulate not only how to defy authoritarianism, but how to rigorously pursue our own good ideas at the state and local level. I dove in by asking Chris to explain how he chose to write about soft secession.
There have been days where I write 3 articles and they get to different stages of being done, and I throw out all 3 of them. And sometimes it's because I do 4 hours of research and I say, okay, well, this isn't going to work. It's just not going to work. I had this one idea about, is there a way for tribes in the United States to be able to help us get around tariff law? Took 4 hours of research to figure out that I was wrong. So, and then other times I just write an article and I say, this isn't the moment for it. Maybe in a few months or some bit of news will come out and it'll be relevant. So it's a lot of being wrong. I'm wrong so much more often than I'm right, but I try to be honest with myself about what I can intuitively tell is going to be, this is the moment for. What are people looking for right now? The main thing that guides what I write is I try to ask myself, what's stressing me out right now? What's concerning me? Because part of my coping mechanisms is I try to act. I try to find something tangible that I can do in response to the stress that's coming around me. And that's part of the creation of the Existentialist Republic, is we live under a world that seems to be getting worse in so many ways. And how do you deal with that? How do you find meaning? How do you find value? How do you find your place in that world? And so the work of writing articles, it's meant to be prescriptive as well as descriptive, diagnostic as well.
What's inbounds? What's out of bounds?
I try to focus on the things that I feel I can speak authoritatively on. My background, I was a law enforcement officer. My master's degrees in Homeland Security. I was a corrections officer. If I'm speaking about race or something like that, I want to make sure to be helpful to the people who who definitely have a more appropriate voice in that space. So generally, though, I try to stay in the area where I can speak more authoritatively, and it's more appropriate for me to lend my voice to that subject. As much as I can serve activism and people's goal to make the world a better place, So out of bounds is, I'm not a doctor, so I try to make sure I avoid medical advice and those sorts of things, right? And there's people who I think they start to get attention and then they say, cool, I'm an expert on everything. Everybody wants to hear my opinions on everything. And I'm not the hot take guy. I don't want to give you hot takes. I want to give you facts. I want to give you research. I want to give you really valuable information for, hey, I think there's a problem. Let me solidify that that's real. And then let's look at things that are research backed and proven to actually be able to help in this situation that we're all stressed about in politics.
What would most of your Substack readers say you are best at writing about?
Best at, I would say providing actionable solutions, because that's something that I see a lot of responsiveness in my comment sections, and I look to my comment sections. They have informed some of my most popular articles, that really helped me refine a lot of the processes that I'm trying to deliver to people, is they say that most journalists, they just describe a problem and they don't give you anything to do about it. So what do you feel at the end of that? You're like, oh, great, we're done for. And there's just nothing to do. And I want to give you something to take. You have that frustration. We've identified a problem. What can we do with it? And a lot of that comes from cognitive behavioral therapy and me being in therapy, thanks to the Department of Veterans Affairs. So trying to transform that, my process of trying to be healthy, my readers have responded and said, thank you for giving us this thing that kind of helps us realize what we're going to do with the frustration and concern and fear that we're experiencing.
Thank you for that. And there's a lot in what you're saying that I relate to. I mean, Pacific Time popped up on Inauguration Day of this year as my reaction to the anxiety about the direction of the country that unfortunately was very confirmed by the first several months of the Trump administration. And where I first learned of you was a friend of mine all the way over in Spain saying, have you heard of this guy? He's writing about questions of autonomy and soft secession and independence in ways that you're thinking about and describing. So I saw a fellow traveler there, and then just have really, really enjoyed the substantive nature of your work. And I appreciate what you're saying about it being actionable. It's always very prescriptive and not just prescriptive to the powers that be, but prescriptive to any reader. Here are moves that you could make. Back to this point about soft secession, you have been a leading advocate and proponent of the exploration of soft secession regionally on the West Coast, but in other pockets of the country that seem to be on the side of protecting democracy. What is soft secession? And can we afford to go soft on it, even though the recent elections seem to present hope for forces on the side of democracy?
Part of the soft secession mindset, there's people, I'll put that out there, and they'll say, you're going to abandon people in red states and that sort of thing. Soft secession is maybe the only hope that we really have to keep this country as one. It's moving more towards a European Union style model, a federalist model, something that many of the founders of this country were in support of. Right now, there is a power imbalance. The Senate, we have 36 million people in California with 2 senators, and we have 500,000 people in Wyoming with 2 senators. That doesn't even include the Electoral College. That doesn't even include gerrymandering. That doesn't even include that we haven't uncapped the House. We have all these institutional things that have made it very unfair and tilted things in one direction. So soft secession is just saying states need to strategically have non-compliance with certain federal policies so that we're able to regain equitable control over how our states are run. It is not appropriate or fair for Louisiana and Wyoming and other states that have very small populations to tell California, Washington, Oregon, New York how to run our state. We're trying to move forward. We want to move into the future. And so how can we do this? How can we handle it? There's 3 main tenets of the soft secession model that I propose. One is strategic non-compliance. That means when we get ordered to do things that we think are illegal or unethical, even beyond illegal, unethical, morally wrong, we don't do it. Republicans have not had a problem doing this. They've done it very successfully. They spent 50 years fighting Roe v. Wade. There was a Supreme Court decision saying they lost, and they spent 50 years fighting it anyway until they won. That's the sort of tenacity that we need because we are fighting for what's right. They didn't say, well, the law says that we lost. I guess we should give up. We need that same zealotry and tenacity for what's morally right. Another one of the 3 main pillars for the soft secession model is non-tax revenue to facilitate the social safety net programs that we're replacing. So let's say Social Security and Medicare are gone, which Republicans plan on doing. I think probably everybody watching would agree that that's something. I mean, they talk about getting rid of it. That's what they want to do. So why shouldn't we develop these programs at the state level? Well, more taxation isn't the only response. It's actually very regressive to say, okay, cool, raise taxes. That's how we're going to pay for the state level answer to Medicaid and SSI. No, non-tax revenue. That means making public banking, like in North Dakota, where they've done it successfully and profitably for 100 years. They've been able to turn a profit every single year for that century. They were remarkably robust during the 2008 recession. And it's because they're answering to the public, not to shareholders. They're offering better deals and they're bringing in non-tax revenue. That is a way to move forward, to be able to fund these social safety nets that we need. We can't rely on the federal government to make sure that everybody has health care, that we don't have unhoused populations, that everybody's fed. But we can do that at the state level. And, beyond public banking that every state could have, municipal broadband. The state of Tennessee enacted municipal broadband, public broadband. They were able to profitably deliver better service to the people of Tennessee for their broadband needs. And this brings in revenue that the state can then direct towards other resources. Now, they mostly use that money corruptly because they're run by Republicans, and that's what Republicans do. But the point is, utilities, another one. People are very frustrated about utilities. There's all these scams that they have, PG&E, Avista, where I know in Washington State, Avista says, okay, we're allowed to raise your rates if we're funding new projects. So they just say that they're going to do a new project, they raise your rate, and then the project never happens. And that money goes into their shareholders' pockets. That money goes into the CEO's, bonuses. These need to be publicly funded. These need to be publicly run. They need to be accountable to the public. The only way to get that tax revenue benefiting the public and building our social safety nets is through public ownership. So we already have models for this. We do a great job also with the U.S. Postal Service. So that's pillar number 2. Pillar number 3, prosecution of corrupt officials. We need attorney generals actually putting, at any level, federal or otherwise, corrupt officials in handcuffs. If you're accepting a bribe, that's a crime. Lawsuits are for civil issues, but prosecutions, that means handcuffs, and that's what we need to be doing. There is no reason, truly, legally speaking, precedent-wise, there is no reason that states cannot be putting people like Homan and Gabbard in handcuffs. They can be running aggressive anti-corruption investigations. We cannot rely on the Department of Justice to weed out corruption anymore. We can't rely on the 17 inspectors general that were fired in the first week of the Trump administration. They've done everything they can to get rid of any sort of compliance or ethics oversight. If we want to have any sort of a functioning federal government, it's on the states now to facilitate that. And so that also means interstate compacts to facilitate it. So in 1934, the federal government, Congress, passed a law saying that states can enact law enforcement related interstate compacts at will. They do not need further approval for that interstate compact. And so every state that's willing, which would be the blue states, could agree to aggressively investigate corruption at every level, especially related to the Epstein files. And when New York finds some information that can be charged in California, they send that information to California, or they send it to Texas or whomever, and they release it publicly if that's what needs to happen to at least put heat on these states to hold people accountable, because nobody should be above the law. And so if soft secession, if giving power to the people, that's what that means. We're trying to take power from the federal government, from Trump, and we're trying to put it in the hands of the people. That is soft secession. That is saying we're going to bring governance to the lowest level possible, where we have the maximum control, and then we're going to use that as leverage to fight corruption and to build social safety nets.
So you're saying the three tenets of soft secession are, number 1, noncompliance with federal rules and laws that run against the law or are against our kind of moral beliefs in specific parts of the country. 2, finding new revenue sources, basically moving toward more financial sovereignty to take care of our local needs. And 3, you're saying the prosecution of corruption and criminal behavior at the federal level. And I think you also very succinctly there said the point is not separation. The point is not the South leaving the Union during the Civil War. The point is local control to the extent possible so that we have governance and resources addressing local challenges, local opportunities to the extent possible. So this leads to my question. You're nodding and saying, yep, I'm close. I've got that. Run the test. I mean, Donald Trump has clearly provided many bright examples of why soft secession could be important. But rewind the clock. Was the same argument in place under Joseph Biden, under Barack Obama, under George W. Bush? Has this always been there? And why is the argument now stronger than ever?
You know, what's funny about the states' rights, argument is whoever's not in power throughout the entire history of the United States is the one who's arguing for it. It's been a left issue. It's been a right issue. Democrats are probably, they take turns. So, but the thing is, if the federal government of the United States has so much power that half the country or a third of the country or whatever is terrified that the other side's going to win, even if many of them are delusional. Like I do think the other half is delusional, but if they're all scared that the other half is going to win, then maybe that office holds too much power. I don't believe that California or Washington or Oregon or New York or even Florida or Texas, that these states require a very heavy-handed, powerful, unitary, executive-backed federal government to manage themselves. You know, our current system of governance is 250 years old, and Donald Trump has made very clear how much of it was held together with norms, with politeness, with just continuing things how they'd gone, because everybody was profiting. Everybody was in on the grift. And so they played nice. And Donald Trump is the first one to just say, no, I'm going to break every norm so I can become as powerful as possible. So he identified these flaws in our system, but they were present before. That's why, soft secession is happening whether or not we want it to. Zoran Momdani and, many other folks, they're out here and they are saying, okay, no matter what Donald Trump is doing or what the governor is doing or at any level, I'm going to try to provide for the people of my municipality. And I'm going to do everything I can to do that, even if it means creating some friction or breaking some rules. And that's what the voters want, and that's what they deserve, and we're capable of managing that. To view the current structure of our federal government as immutable and perfect, those are very antithetical. We recognize that there are flaws, and they're not going to go away just because we get rid of Trump.
So, yeah, and you've anticipated my next question, which is, hey, when Democrats are in power, Republicans talk of secession. When Republicans are in power, Democrats talk about it. What's the argument, regardless of who's president, regardless of who's in power, for us to weaken federal government and strengthen states and local governments?
Yeah, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that I trust Governor Ferguson to do a better job of managing the needs of what people in Washington want than Donald Trump. That's not very contentious, is it? And also, Texas, California, they're never going to agree on a president. As long as Fox News exists, I promise you, there isn't going to be a deep canvassing campaign that's going to help people in Texas wake up. It's not going to happen. Also, is it worth the effort rather than just saying, why don't we create more of a European Union style system where states have more power to develop their own revenue? And people have been arguing this for a while. And in our lifetime, sure, it's mostly been the right wing. Part of that's because after World War II and after the terrible tariff policies of Republicans last time they tried this, Democrats were largely in control of the federal government for decades. And, President Johnson, who I think doesn't get enough praise for, the things that he did with the Voting Rights Act and with Medicare, Medicaid. These are really important policies that were passed at the benefit of the public. But the entire time they were being fought, this through line of white supremacy has existed throughout the United States, this desire to move us backwards. We've been two fundamentally different nations throughout the time. And so if we want to be able to stay one nation, we need a restructuring of how things are run, because it's not fair to people in California that Donald Trump can just say, you gave us tax dollars and we're not going to give you it, even though you have an emergency, and even though that's what it's allocated for. That's not fair. And so it's our duty to make things fair, to make things equitable.
So this is a show, Chris, about what if questions. So what if there was a serious move towards soft secession, what role would we preserve for a federal national government?
Well, the federal government at that point would take on much of the role of the European Union, which is managing commerce, managing the currency, managing military action, and also preserving democracy within each area. By the standards of the European Union, states like Texas would lose their voting power at the federal level because of the corruption and voter suppression that occurs. So what if we moved in that direction? It would mean, hey, Texas, if you don't make sure every citizen in your borders can vote, you do everything you can to make sure they can vote to be a democracy, then we're not going to let you decide on what this country does with its money or what this country does with its military. We did it to the European Union did it to Poland. They did it to Hungary, and the United States needs to do it to Texas. We need to do it to Louisiana. We need to do it to Florida. That's what if we move in the soft secession direction, is we stop trying to play by these rules that are so deeply broken. And instead we say we need a restructuring within the current system that radically transforms the power of people to decide the direction that this country goes. Because right now we know that me and you, we have less power than we've had in a long time. Somebody who's in the state of Wyoming has 34 times the voting power as you or I. And that's not right. It's wrong. I don't know what the founders would think of it, but frankly, as much as I admire people like James Madison and Jefferson, the system is broken and we need to do better. And we don't have time to wait. And we can't, by the time we realize that the elections are done for and they don't really work anymore, how many elections do we have to wait? How many years are we waiting for failed elections where they've obviously been stolen? So sorry to rant a little bit at the end there, but
no, helpful. I mean, one thing I think you're helping set straight is when the term secession comes up, people immediately want to go to violent civil war. And of course, you or I, nobody is cheering for that, nor are we necessarily cheering for the sovereign country of Mississippi that gets to discriminate against their Black citizens. I think we're saying there's still a role for a strong federal government, but the model that we've been working with has stopped functioning effectively. And the reason to be talking about soft secession right now is we're watching Donald Trump in real time bust through norms that held it loosely together with bubblegum and baling wire. And do we want it to get better or do we want it to get worse?
Yeah, well, and a phrase I want to mention real quick is soft secession is the quiet quitting of governance. Okay. Look, we don't have to go all the way down this path, but I think we need to move the Overton window. We need to make it clear that if states like Texas aren't going to play ball, if they're going to obstruct whenever they're not in power and refuse to engage in serious acceptance that we are one country, they don't accept that we're one country. Republicans largely talk about Democrats and blue states as their enemy. They have started this fight. And if they cannot come to the table of governance in good faith, then we cannot govern with them. And so we need to move in that direction. And if they want to engage in good faith, re-engage, and come back to that table, let's do it. But it needs to be in a more equitable way. So the secession and soft secession scares people. But it's just saying we need more states' rights. We need more power to not allow a federal government to overreach.
I've been paying close attention to things Jill Lepore has been writing lately. I'm guessing you've been looking at some of her stuff. Do we need a full-on revision of the Constitution in order to bring about what you're describing? Or are there plenty of moves available to states to start asserting more power?
Much of what I advocate for in the soft secession model that I propose is very constitutionally and legally gray. And it's meant to be that way. I was talking about the anti-abortion activists earlier. They would pass laws. And right now, even Republicans have public schools that they've opened in red states that are Christian, explicitly and solely Christian. That's unconstitutional. But to them, they say, this is what I believe in. It's my morals. It's my values. So we're going to do it and we'll let the courts litigate it. That's where I'm at. Would a constitutional amendment or constitutional reworking be what we need? Absolutely. Let's do it. But if we're putting money on it, I'm not going to bet on Republicans suddenly deciding to vote for a constitutional convention or vote for anything that reduces their power. And I would also say at the federal level, many Democrats probably wouldn't vote for that either because they'd be risking losing their seats. And at the state level, if you want to talk to your mayor, you could, at least in Seattle, I'm sure if you wanted to get a hold of the mayor-elect, you could. Absolutely. I really bet it. And Seattle's not a tiny city. If you want to get a hold of your state representatives, even easier. You could probably get coffee with them if you wanted. In Spokane, the mayor sat down with me. City council members will talk to you. You can get a hold of these people. That's democracy. That's what we need. Do I think we're going to get a constitutional convention? No. Do I think it would help? Sure. But what I do know is that at the state level, Republicans have been fighting back against stuff they do not agree with very effectively for decades. It's time for us to start playing the same game.
I mean, it strikes me that we are perhaps entering a period of much more muscular politics. I think there's an old line about Democrats campaigning in poetry, but governing in prose. And the writing analogy falls down. I think what we have to watch positively in the example of the Trump administration is the exercise of raw power. And if we treat that as judo, they make a move, they jab. How do you absorb that energy and translate that back in different and stronger energy with more clever energy to outwit your opponent? And it seems like that's the era upon us. Does that analogy apply? Do you subscribe to that, or do you think we're into something different?
I love judo. I think that's a great analogy. I think we need some more Krav Maga.
Tell me more about that.
I think we need to be a little more brutal. I think when they go low, we stomp them into the ground. That's kind of my mindset. Not, of course, with literal violence, because I'm not advocating for literal violence. But what I am saying is the high ground is of no value if you have no ground. If you're trying to go for the high ground, we should be mean sometimes, and we should be kind other times, because I want to be united with the people who need it, with the people who are suffering, with the people who are undefended. And I want to be divided. There's Indivisible does amazing work, but I want to be divided from the people who are out here to cause the purposeful suffering of others, who want to take away food from those in need, who want to enact policies that take away health care or make it prohibitively expensive, who want to pass policies that guarantee that there's going to be more people living on the street, or that we're going to war, or that we're aligning ourselves with countries that are committing genocide. I don't want to be on their team. I want to be divided from them. I want to be mean to them. I want to shame them. And so I love judo, but I'm a Krav Maga guy anyway. But I got to say, I want to be mean. I want to send the energy their way, and I want to do what works. This isn't sport. This is life or death. That's the Krav Maga difference. It's about, we are in this fight, and any fight that you're in is life or death. That's what it's about. It's our future.
I appreciate the alternative analogy. So then, Chris, what do you consider the lowest hanging fruit for West Coast governors and mayors to really exercise the brutal power politics, Krav Maga, as you say, that are going to be necessary to muscularly assert autonomy and stand up to an immoral opposition?
Well, okay. I'm going to mix in some different martial arts here because you got me interested in that. So your Krav Maga moves are going to be arresting people in Trump's cabinet for the corrupt things that we know we're doing. Launch investigations on all of them. Find out what they're doing that's illegal. I promise they are. Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. Put them in handcuffs. Throw them in a jail cell. That's your Krav Maga. Now, your judo is going to be actually providing substantive, good quality policy to the people of your state. It's going to be saying, hey, right now in Washington State, we have Cascade Care, right? Now, that's mandating that private corporations have a plan with minimum standards, and that's a good plan. But why don't we take it a step further and make an actual state-run healthcare plan? And it could be a non-tax revenue stream, because we're not giving these huge payouts to CEOs. We're going to give everyone in the state the option to join this healthcare plan. We're going to negotiate for prices. Maybe we'll join into an interstate compact with Oregon and California and New York, and we're going to negotiate for our prices. And then guess what? We're able to give the people in the state lower prices for their healthcare. We're going to take that revenue. What are we going to do with that? I don't know. free public transportation. How about this? Free public housing, high density urban public housing. We're going to make it good, and we're going to take care of our people, because truly, and this is judo. I love judo. This is the judo way. How about you do a better job taking care of the people who live in your city or state than the federal government is doing? As Trump tears things down, Governor Ferguson, Mayor Brown, we're coming for you. We're going to help make sure that you have housing, you have good jobs, you have a robust economy, you have some health care, all of it. You can count on us. That's how you fight back against authoritarianism. That's soft secession, and that's going to actually make the world a better place.
I'll build on that a little and say, why not partner with British Columbia and tap into Canada's discount drug prices and follow their model on providing healthcare to all citizens, and inject our model, which is using technology to better optimize care and to promote R&D. Yeah, I mean, why would we be constrained to like-minded states within the U.S. when there are like-minded folks across the border?
I love that, Greg. I love that. Work with other countries. Go ahead, do it. Don't sue first, do first. Let's not get into this litigation stuff. Let them come for us. Let them bring it to court. Let them stop us from doing the thing that's going to substantively improve the lives of people in our area.
I am appreciating your writing skill and experience. Don't sue first, do first. The quiet quitting of governance. You've got the good taglines. I appreciate that. That's awesome. I hesitate to bring this up, but it's so tempting given your background in law enforcement and homeland security. You know what? One thing I've watched the Trump administration adopt is, security through strength, and the deployment of ICE and the National Guard are good examples. The deployment of aircraft carrier groups off the coast of Venezuela is an example. How can the West Coast and other blue states protect themselves against that kind of assertion of strength? Are there opportunities for police forces, for example, to invest in building drone air forces that surveil hostile federal forces? It's not about attacking them. It's about surveilling them, monitoring them, gathering in information so that we could prosecute illegality.
That is something that I would be so happy to see. That's an awesome idea. I hadn't even considered about that facet of increasing the investigative resources and integrating technology with that for tracking the illegal and immoral and inhumane things that they're doing. Now, is it going to happen? Well, I don't know. People have their own opinions, but what I can say is something legal, or is something feasible? Would something be effective? And that is certainly something that would be effective, is we need to develop the resources to defend the human rights of people living within our cities and states. And we should take our attorneys general, we should take our mayors, we should take our state representatives, we should take our city council members, we should take all of these people to task. And we should say, do you care about human rights? Okay, well then what are you doing? Because I don't want to hear about the new code enforcement about traffic violations. I want to hear about what you're doing about federal agents coming in here, breaking the law and not being penalized. Because if I break the law, I suffer consequences. But if ICE comes in here and assaults and kidnaps people, they're not facing consequences. You're breaking the social contract, and you're complicit. As a lawmaker, you are complicit if you are not actively obstructing or opposing that, if you're not taking substantive steps to fight back against it. And so those are the things that we need to be demanding of them. And that's the problem. I can speak for Washington State. We have incredible people in this state who are such great lawmakers. They're good at bureaucracy, not in an insulting way, but just they're good at managing an organization, but they're unambitious. And, part of what took down the Weimar Republic was they were playing by the old rules, while the fascists recognized that they could just make new rules. And so we're going to lose if we don't recognize that this is a new game we're playing. We have the chessboard and they've lit it on fire, and we can't keep moving the same chess pieces. We have to adapt to that. We have to do what you're saying. Maybe they'll act, maybe they won't. But I do know that every representative at every level is a human. Human behavior is impacted by psychology and by behavior, the behavioral psychology. So I'm getting off topic from your question, but
no, I think it's relevant. Look, it goes back to your point about do first rather than sue first. I mean, Democrats, I think, continue to play by the old rules of if it's illegal, go to court and wait for the courts to settle it out. Well, that's not fast enough for the way that society is being undone. The norms are being undone. So we have to move more quickly. And I know that you're not someone who's just saying we got to make it up from scratch. You're keenly observing precedents for the kinds of actions that are available to places that are on the side of democratic rule and taking care of suffering. So the example I'll offer in the realm of security is in the wake of 9/11, New York City did not wait for the FBI and the CIA to get its act together. It formed a counterterrorism unit within the New York Police Department. It said, we have to take care of our own safety. We will continue to coordinate with federal forces that are helpful to us. But that, I think, is an analogy that we might deploy here in saying it doesn't need 10,000 drones in the air. We need 10 over Seattle to make sure that ICE is acting legally and that we're going to hold them to account when they break the law.
Yeah, well, and that's a great example. And that's exactly what you just nailed something, because the establishment loves to say, we shouldn't try because it's not going to be perfect or it might fail. And that's wrong. We need to be willing to fail. We need to be willing to fall short, because just to take the steps, just to oppose, just to fight back is to win. Because if you do that in enough ways, that's asymmetric warfare. That's the heart of it. They have more power than we do. They run all three branches of the federal government corruptly. Our job is to create 1,000 different pressure points to fight back. And I'll also mention precedent-wise, because you're right, the soft secession model I'm proposing is using precedent, is actually working within our system. It's just not in ways that have been applied recently. But after the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, there were states in the North that said, cool, we're not going to follow it. Not only are we not going to nullify it, we're not going to follow the Fugitive Slave Act, we're going to arrest slavers who come into our territory. We're going to put them, that is the perfect precedent for exactly what's going on, to put these people in handcuffs. And if a law enforcement officer says they're not going to do it, then they go in handcuffs too. And you do that with the whole department if you need to. Because if you follow your convictions, if you follow your morals, then I do believe that you win. I really do, in my heart. If you follow the bureaucracy and acquiescing because it might not fit the institutionalist model that raised you up, you will fail. But if you follow your convictions and you fight with everything you got, I think you win. That's the only way to defeat fascism. That's the only way to defeat authoritarianism, was with that spiritual, deep conviction that I know what's right and I know that we need to fight back.
I think you're hinting at the need for us to reconnect with A, moral law, and B, to trust that we do have a strong sense of morality that we've taken for granted for a long time, because the overall institutional order held together by norms was working for a good number of people, not everybody, and that we could trust it. And we've seen that break down in a very short amount of time. And so, back to the question of why now is the time, I think you're saying, hey, because if we don't get after this, if we don't start contending with the breakdown of our moral order, it's going to disappear and we're not going to be able to get it back.
Yeah, and one more thing to that point. So there's two directions things can go. One, Donald Trump and Republicans have one-party rule. They do so much to suppress votes in red states and even in blue states, and they pass laws and they have corrupt judges. I mean, 25 years ago, the Supreme Court handed an election to a Republican. They said to stop counting votes so that a Republican could win. So we've been on this track. So let's say we end up with one-party rule, and it's just Republicans' model. It's J.D. Vance. It's Peter Thiel deciding what America is for everybody. That's one path. And the other path is, oh, wow, voting figures it out. We end up with Pritzker or Newsom or someone like that. The Democrats win enough votes and they pass some constitutional amendments that need to get passed. Maybe either of those things happen. But either way, if we are passing these anti-corruption policies, these pro-social safety net policies, if we are fighting back with compacts that create non-tax revenue, if we're doing all of these things, we're better off either way. We really are. So you don't have to wait till next election to figure it out. That's what I love about what you and I are talking about right now.
Yeah. So I love it. I mean, I think the question you're asking is, why wouldn't we pursue these paths? Is there an argument that suggests we wouldn't be better off? I'm not framing that exactly right. But
oh no, well that would just be, if you're a corporation or an extremely wealthy person, we know that this system has been tilted for a long time, and I think we would not have Donald Trump in office if Democrats had been doing a sufficient job at addressing the needs of people. But people, I try not to criticize Democrats too much because there's literal fascists. Truly, there's literal fascists. So it's really easy to bully the people who are fighting them. But we do need to do better in the places that Democrats control. They need to do more, not incremental, ambitious changes to improve the lives of the people in those states. And that is the best tool. I'd love to see any of these Republicans, that Trump has appointed in handcuffs. But if I had to pick one thing that was actually done to fight back against authoritarianism, it would just be to pass universal health care in your state, or to get corporate money out of politics in your state, or to end, to build public housing so nobody's homeless. That's what we need to do. Because if you improve the lives of people, then that is the act of defiance. That is fighting back. And that will spread. That will spread better than any authoritarian creep.
So I was going to ask you for a headline from December of 2026. We're wrapping up the year. An election has hopefully just happened. We believe it's been free and fair. You're not satisfied with the headline that says Democrats won. What is your headline, Chris, for this time next year?
Well, I'll start by saying if the headline was Democrats gain supermajority in the House and Senate, then I might be okay with it, but I don't think that's going to happen. And most of it is voter suppression. Like if Democrats got a 15-point lead everywhere across the board, it might happen, but that's the unrealistic thing. The realistic thing that I want to see is sort of what happened in 2025. That headline is Democrats elect governors and mayors across the country and get supermajorities in state houses that are ready to address the needs of the people. Democrats win sweeps at the city and state level, and the uniting factor among the people who won is that they are ready to make sure that the affordability and the pro-affordability, anti-corruption needs of their population are being met.
I love that hopeful note, but let's flip it around, because I think thinking about the future requires us to be utopian on one hand and dystopian on the other. So what's your nightmare scenario for a year from now?
Oh boy, we don't even have an election. We don't have an election, and Democrats have continued to unfortunately not enact the ambitious policies that they need to. Right now, we could be passing laws that say that if the election gets canceled in 2026, we're going to hold it anyway. And also, we're going to nullify any Republican votes that come from Republican states if they try to cancel the election. We could pass those laws. But nightmare scenario, dystopian, we don't have an election, and the unitary executive is running the show. No election. And we're at war.
Let's do some handicapping then. In that hopeful version versus the unhopeful version, what do you think has a better chance? And what are you monitoring to sort of understand whether to be hopeful or to prepare ourselves for a worst case?
That's a really good question. What can we do to prepare ourselves? Get engaged at the local level. I think it's realistic that even if they try to cancel it, that states still run their elections. I could see red states being willing to cancel their elections and blue states not being willing. Even in a place, Governor Ferguson, I think even if Trump said we're not going to do elections, he would still, that might be a move that actually gave us a chance to really push back in a way that some of these people are just very uncomfortable with. And then we do our elections anyway, and things just get a little bit more aggressive after that. It's very clear that, hey, we are actively going against the orders of every blue state is actively defying the orders of the executive.
And I love what you're saying about the need for ambition. I'm trying to think about times where the country or the states or the regions have grown more ambitious. What characterizes the times when civic ambition grows?
The times demand it. That's the great time. Do the times make the man, or does the man make the times? The Abraham Lincoln question. And it's the times that we're in demand us. We are humans, and we conform to the shape of our vessel, and the vessel is our time and our circumstance. And these times of consistently unprecedented circumstances, they're going to require that our representatives start to make tough decisions as they recognize that we are not playing by the same rules that we were 10, 20, 30 years ago, the rules that they were raised in, the rules that benefited them. They're in the position they are in because they were able to play by the rules that the system had, but does not have anymore. And the ones who decide to step up, they will be rewarded. They're going to get the carrot, not the stick. The public is going to say, heck yes, we are so happy to see you here fighting back. That's the Zoran Mamdanis. That's all the people ready to fight back and have ambitious policy, because you don't get to run on incrementalism in times of authoritarian creep. It's just not going to win it for you.
I mean, what you've got me thinking is all the sort of political media establishment debate about alignment and realignment, blue, red, purple, blah, 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 blah. Actually, the times may call for green and yellow and orange. Like it's just a different spectrum. You bring up Mamdani. I think he's a really interesting figure across the board. People praise him as a brilliant campaigner, but now the onus is really on him to put the progress in his progressive politics. So it's a little bit not just about the what, but the how now. And I think the same is true of Katie Wilson, the new mayor-elect in Seattle. How does she accomplish what she said she would? Do you anticipate a revolution in the how?
I think we're going to have to see how that goes. But my personal feelings, which are, I still have more research to do on if this is going to happen, because I think there's a lot of institutional effort resisting change, resisting growth, especially ambitious growth. But my gut says the people who are reaching for the stars, they're going to do some big things.
Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on, Chris. I think you're doing some big things with the Existentialist Republic. It's been really fun to have this conversation with you.
So what if the West Coast stopped waiting for permission? What if we recognized, as Chris lays out, that the Constitution already gives states far more room to maneuver than we've been using? And what if we use that room not to abandon the country, but to model what moral, functional, human-centered governance can look like when the federal government falters? The advocates for authoritarianism and oligarchy aren't sitting around waiting for the courts to rule. They're pushing ahead. The more gray area, the better. Chris argues that courage isn't about perfect policy. It's about the first step, the precedent, the conviction to act, to not wait around. And whether you call it soft secession, moral federalism, or simply functional democracy, the deeper message is clear. The future belongs to the places willing to fight for the people who live there. If today's conversation sparks something in you, share this episode with a friend. Follow the show and join the discussion on Substack, where West Coasters are thinking together about what comes next. And I'll leave you with this question. What if your city or your state disconnected from federal oversight and funding and started acting in your interest and the interest of your neighbors? Thanks for being with me in Pacific Time. I'll see you next time.